Welcome to the third episode of Literary Mojo. Here is the next list of authors, works, and terms. Let's have a look. Booker T. Washington. Booker T. Washington, African American writer, born into slavery on a Virginia plantation. Freed, he taught himself to read and became the founder and head of the Tuskegee Institute, Alabama, a school for African Americans. His works include an autobiography, Up from Slavery, published in 1901, and Working with the Hands, published in 1904. Tom Thumb, A Tragedy, a mock heroic farce by Henry Fielding, performed and published in 1730, and republished in 1731 in an extended version as The Tragedy of Tragedies or The Life and Death of Tom Thumb the Great, with an apparatus of mock scholarly notes in the manner of Alexander Pope's Densiad Variorum. William Hogarth supplied the frontispiece. The play burlesqued the bombastic greatness of heroic tragedies by James Thompson and others. Jonathan Swift claimed that he had laughed only twice in his life, once at a merry Andrew or clown, and once at Tom Thumb. To Autumn, a poem by John Keats, written September 1819, published in 1820. It was his last major poem, and although usually included in a discussion of the odes, Keats himself did not call it an ode. The poem, in three stanzas, is at once a celebration of the fruitfulness of autumn, lightly personified as a figure in various autumnal landscapes, and an elegy for the passing of summer and the transience of life, and its mood has been generally taken to be one of acceptance. Time and Tide, an independent non-party weekly review, a periodical founded in 1920 by Viscountess Rhonda Margaret Haig Thomas, with the support of Rebecca West, Cecily Hamilton, and others. Originally a strongly left-wing and feminist publication, it went through many shades of political opinion before its disappearance in 1977. Its contributors included D. H. Lawrence, Virginia Woolf, Aldous Huxley, Storm Jameson, George Bernard Shaw, and Robert Grace. In 1929, it serialized E. M. Delafield's Diary of a Provincial Lady. The Three Clerks, a novel by Anthony Trollope, published in 1858. The three clerks are Harry Norman, Alaric Tudor, and Alaric's gouchy cousin Charlie. In the course of the novel, each marries one of the daughters of Mrs. Woodward. Charlie's experiences reflect Trollope's own early days as a clerk at the post office. E. P. Thompson, a historian. His works include The Making of the English Working Class, published in 1963, in which he sought to rescue the poor stockinger, the Luddite cropper, the obsolete handloom weaver, the utopian artisan, and even the deluded follower of Joanna Southcote from the enormous condescension of posterity. The Tenant of Wildfell Hall, the second and last of Anne Bronte's novels, published 1848. Written in the first person with a male narrator, Gilbert Markham, it has a complex epistolary and diary structure. Markham, a young farmer, falls in love with Helen Graham, a young widow and talented painter, newly arrived in the neighborhood with her son Arthur. She is the tenant of the title. Her youth, beauty, and seclusion, and her mysterious relationship with her landlord Lawrence give rise to local gossip, which Markham refuses to credit until he himself overhears Helen and Lawrence in intimate conversation. He violently assaults Lawrence, and Helen reveals to him that she had married Arthur Huntington, who had lapsed into a dissolute life. She had fled to protect her child to Wildfell Hall, provided for her by Lawrence, who is her brother. Shortly after the revelation of this secret, Helen returns to nurse her husband through a fatal illness, and the way is left clear to Markham successfully to renew his suit. In her biographical notice published in 1850, Charlotte Bronte suggested that the portrait of Huntington was based on their brother Branwell. The Task. The Task, a poem in 6 books by William Cooper, published 1785. When Cooper's friend Lady Austen suggested to him the sofa in his room as the subject of a poem, the poet set about the task. Its 6 books are entitled The Sofa, The Timepiece, The Garden, The Winter Evening, The Winter Morning Walk, and The Winter Walk at Noon. Cooper opens with a mock heroic account of the evolution of the sofa, but thereafter addresses a wide range of topics, from cucumbers to salvation, in an accessible, emotionally fluent style of blank verse. The poem stresses the delights of a retired life, describes the poet's own search for peace, and evokes the consolations of religious faith, the pleasures of gardening, and the comforts of evenings by the fireside. It condemns aristocratic diversions, French fashions, slavery, and cruelty to animals. The poet shows tenderness not only for his pet hare, but even for worms and snails. Tamale, a tragedy by Nicholas Rowe, produced 1701, with the professed intention of celebrating William III as a high-minded conqueror of the title, and of vilifying Louis XIV under the character of the defeated Bajazet. The play was, until about 1815, revived annually on 5th November, the date of William's landing in England. The Talisman, a novel by Walter Scott, published 1825. The novel describes the adventures of a poor but brave Scottish knight, Sir Kenneth, who is caught up in the intrigues between Richard I of England, the King of France, the Duke of Austria, and the Knights Templars. He is eventually discovered to be Prince David of Scotland. The most striking portrait in the novel is that of Saladin, Sultan of Egypt, whose wisdom and chivalry is contrasted throughout with the scheming and corruption of the Christian leaders. The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, a novel by Mark Twain, published in 1884 as a sequel to The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, published in 1876. Narrated by Huck Finn, it describes the flight of Huck from well-meant attempts to civilize him, and from his feckless father down the Mississippi, where he eventually rejoins Tom Sawyer. He is accompanied by a runaway slave, Jim, whose bid for freedom he supports, despite the inner promptings of a conscience telling him he is stealing the rightful property of Jim's honor. Huck's simplicity is used by Twain to reveal the absurdities of a family feud and the hypocrisies of shore society. His account has become a classic of vernacular narrative. The novel has continued to provoke controversy over its representation and designation of African Americans. Thank you for watching this video. If you like the video, please share and subscribe.